Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar series on software monetization. My name is Holger Schulze. I'm Director of Marketing here at SafeNet and I'll be your moderator today. In today's webcast, From Zero to Software Protection in 60 Minutes, we will discuss the options available to protect your software products and how to make the right choice and how to implement robust protection in a matter of minutes instead of weeks. Our presenters today are Russ Hubbard, VP of Global Sales at SafeNet, Dale Hopkinson, Sales Engineer at SafeNet, and Anthony Seid, also Sales Engineer here at SafeNet. These gentlemen combine many years of experience in the software licensing and protection industry, and I'm looking forward to their presentation. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you that you can submit questions at any time during the live webcast. Simply click the Ask a Question button on your screen to enter your question. And we will collect all questions during the webcast and have a detailed Q&A session at the end. Also, if you would like to share this webcast with your friends and colleagues, please click the Share This button on your screen now and share the webcast link using Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Now, without further ado, let's get started and open the line for Russ Hubbard, VP of Global Sales at SafeNet. And Russ will give us some background information on software protection. Russ, take it away.
Thank you, Holger. Typically, when we go through a lot of these webinars, we provide corporate information in addition to some of the subject matter. Today, I'm going to actually just dive straight into the subject matter, and we will go through some corporate information later, but I imagine most of you on this call are really interested in learning how to protect your applications more than who SafeNet is. So with that, if you go to this next slide that Holger has put up, we really break the portfolio of our solutions down into essentially the protection side and the licensing side of the solution. And today we're really going to focus on the protection aspects. As you can see through this life cycle, protection is often confused with some of the other aspects of what goes into getting a product to market. And we really focus on, when we say protection, we're really focusing on what happens to the software pre-release as opposed to the distribution and how the licensing gets fulfilled, operationally fulfilled, and managed beyond that. So with that, let's go into a little bit of a definition about what software protection is. It has many names, first and foremost. Software protection is sometimes called anti-piracy, sometimes copy prevention. Often we hear people talk about reverse engineering protection or even IP protection. So it has many, many names, but ultimately you're really talking about two methodologies that are used to protect an asset of your own creation. And those are encryption, where we go in and literally encrypt bytecode. And the second one is code obfuscation, where you basically create difficulties in allowing people to find and reverse engineer your code. And this can be done through dead code insertion, method splitting, exception triggering. Those are just a few. There are numerous other methodologies as well. But basically, obfuscation is the art of making it difficult to find what somebody is looking for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dale Hopkinson. And he can really go through a little bit more detail on exactly how you might want to conceptualize the protection part of your solution for your software. Dale?
Thanks, Russ, for that. So as Russ had mentioned, basically with protecting any software, when you're looking at DRM Solutions, you always have essentially two options. One is some kind of file wrapping, which we call our tool the envelope. This is based off encryption. One of the nice things is very fast to implement. There's no source code needed to be touched. So if as a developer, if you didn't want to go back into your source code and do certain things with API, cache control messages, you can simply wrap that, which now produces a binary that's ready for the installer. Also, you do have an API method. Of course, the API, any good solution should have a universal API, meaning that the API should not be dependent on the licensing. And of course, you can do more customized protection with the API. You can insert certain checks at various places, do checksums, and use encrypted memory and things of those sorts. Of course, with our solution, we do allow you to use both API and envelope method, for additional security. So you can use the envelope to get an encryption to make sure no one is trying to reverse the application. Then, of course, during the API, you can do certain runtime checks. And of course, for any kind of migrations, whether it's legacy solutions of ours or even a homegrown solution or third-party vendors, both of our options doesn't allow you to, kind of implement in a way that you can coexist with the legacy solutions, while you decide to phase that out and to work out those internal policies. So just taking a step on option 1, protection of the envelope. So as we mentioned, the envelope is a tool that gives you the automatic protection. It's something you would use if you're concerned with IP protection, copy protection, even data protection. It gives you various hacking protections. So if you're concerned with someone using a debugger to try to reverse the application, our envelope actually stops that. We base off the AES encryption, and we can do bulk encryption, we say. Pretty much about everything you encrypt in the envelope, which of course you can encrypt EXEs or DLLs or COM objects. We encrypt that bulk, so every file is encrypted differently with about 5 or different AES keys, just to give that security. So pretty much you can decide to have the debug check on, which just says that at the load time of the application, we're going to verify that no debug is running, which of course is a most opportune time for a hacker to run a debugger. They can grab your import tables and have fun. And kind of just the high-end topology here of the envelope protection in action. So if you see on the left-hand side, there's an envelope-protected application. Again, envelope would just wrap the application in encryption. So once that's deployed now to the customer, of course, with our solution, we allow you to utilize either the software key or the hardware key, any kind of licensing model you like attached to those keys. So again, one of the things we say is protect once and deliver many. You can decide to protect the application as you see fit, in this case with the envelope, and then deploy any kind of key you like, whether it's hardware key, software key, and also the different license type. And of course, that is something that can be changed in the field. You can upgrade, downgrade, and so forth. And here's just a sample look at the envelope itself. So the envelope itself, again, it gives you that strong protection in a few seconds. There's a few clicks of a button. And for the developers on the phone, there is a command line, so you can make it just another batch build. And some new things we have right now inside the envelope with the .NET protection, we're still doing method level protection. We're working now with Framework 4, .NET Framework 4. And we also, of course, is Win32 and Win64-bit. Likewise with .NET 32 and 64-bit. We also have a tool known as DataHash. So DataHash can allow you to protect your EXE, your application. And let's say now you have possibly a Flash file or some kind of Excel file that's tied to your application, which you want to verify that this data should only be read with your application. You can decide actually to encrypt that data file, and just by encrypting it, a specific encryption code is shared between the application and your key, and it's made sure that this data file, let's say it's a Flash file, can only be launched from your application. So no one can double-click that Flash file or even a movie file, something like that. No one can double-click it and launch it with the default application, the default player. It must be played with your application, which, of course, can only play for keys in the field, whether it's hardware key or software key. Since you don't have the ability to access the source code with the envelope, you do have the option to customize the error messages. So you can change those default error messages so it doesn't pop up Sentinel hash. You can change it to your company name and some kind of default status you'd like to. And also one of the things we like to highlight with the envelope as well, that's new. So as far as the Java protection, we have now J2E protection that we're offering. What we do with Java, we keep it native Java. We don't require you to convert it to EXEs, which kind of eliminates the whole purpose of Java being cross-platform. As well with Java, we're doing method-level protection. And you can even decide to implement any kind of methods that have Java reflection that you already built inside of it. That's supported. We also have the method-level cache enables you to balance between the runtime performance and security, which, of course, security is always that decision that you come to. How far do you want to go to affect the usability of something? In Java, as Russ had mentioned, one of the techniques is obfuscation. We do, even for .NET as well, we do offer obfuscation. But again, we're not based off obfuscation. Obfuscation by itself is rather weak. It just adds the amount of time and frustration to, someone of malicious intent. But you do have the ability to do obfuscation at the method level. Now that's just, again, another layer you can add on top of the encryption, which is, again, based off AES 128-bit. Okay, and then just moving on to the API. So here on the screen is just a very small syntax of the API. Again, someone will use the API if you would like to embed calls inside the application. And really, API gives you the ability now to do certain things during the runtime of the application. So the envelope is just really concerned with safely decrypting the application at load time. And then, of course, with the envelope, you can decide to do a periodic background check just to verify the hardware key or the software key is still active during that session. If you use the API, one of the things you do, you get some flexibility on the application side. As I had mentioned, you can read and write to memory, encrypt, decrypt. You can do certain checksums and things like that. And again, as at various intervals, or you can even create some kind of random intervals since you do have the access to the source code. You can catch and control those error messages. And what you see on the screen here is just a very small syntax of the hash login, which is the initial code you would use. So here's just a breakdown again of the API. You see, the brief API in the middle there, hash login, hash logout. That's the most basic form of protection with the API. So a developer, what you would do, you would take the language of choice, and we have, I believe the next screen, I'll let you know what languages we have. But you would link with the API, with the DLL, the library. And then by default, you would call the hash login, which just simply initiates a session to the key. So the login, we actually built in all the license logic, so there's no need for you to do a hash login, then check the license terms, validate the terms. That login, we actually built in the functionality to do all the validation for you. So once the login returns successful, you can decide to run the functionality. So very basic, you can think of, let's say I have a notepad, and I have a print functionality. Before I execute that print, I would call a hash login. Now if my status is 0, which means successful, then I would jump to the print, and that functionality would run. And of course, when that functionality is finished, I would simply do hash logout. So that's the most basic form. Again, I can take that as far as I wanted to. I can do a hash login. I can read and write memory. I can check, do certain checks, and then I can perform the running of the application. And I can throw some garbage strings before I even do the logout. So you do have that ability. Also, we do, if you see the one with the GUI picture there, we have a tool known as the toolbox utility. This is just really geared towards trying to assist you in learning the API much faster. The toolbox is a source code tutorial as well as generator. So again, we're giving you quick and easy to use tools without consuming your time. So the toolbox you can actually change to the language of your choice from C, C++, Java, C#. You can actually change the language in the toolbox. You can go to the toolbox and actually code inside the toolbox. And one of the nice things is you can actually copy and paste that code to your own source. So once again, just making it much easier for you to implement. And here we had mentioned, the API interfaces. So the initial API, the runtime API, again, this just means what you can integrate with your own application. I believe there's some you didn't document. There's FoxPro, there's Delphi, there's Fortran. Usually if there's a language that you need, we do have it. But here's the basic API. Also, I did mention we have what's called the activation API. So that's if you're using a software license and you want to embed that activation functionality in your product, like you see most products say like tools and activate or help and activate. You do have that. There's also a C# interface for that. The Business Studio, for anyone who's not too sure about that, that's our utility that does the licensing management and enablement. There's an API for that as well, also a SOAP interface that you don't have to use our front-end GUI if you didn't like to. And then, of course, the installer. One of the most important things of the solution is your installer. A lot of customers judge the application based on their install experience. So we allow you to embed all the components that we require. You can embed that in your own installer. So just to make it much simpler and much simplified for the end customer. They don't have to go and install, double-click on 2 or 3 components. They launch one installer, and it's installed automatically for them. And of course, once you do implement that protection, I will mention, again, you can use both protection. If you decide to use both, you, of course, would implement the API first, since you do touch the source code. Then once you have that successfully and to your liking, you would simply encrypt that with the envelope on top of that. But of course, the entire solution, as Rush had mentioned in that first slide, it's an all-encompassing solution. It is security and licensing. Though we separate those two processes, you must have now a valid key in the environment, whether it's a hardware or software, And we just call this cross-locking. So you can decide to have a hardware key for one customer, software for another customer, but that same protected application can. And with that said, I'll just kick it back to Russ.
Thank you, Dale. I appreciate it. So once again, I'll go back to the slide we started with here and really kind of reiterate some of the comments there that the protection aspect is really what you need to do before you decide to release a product. And in an upcoming webinar, we will start to focus on some of the licensing aspects, which most highly correlate with business models and the types of business models you may choose to employ with your product. This can obviously span a variety of topics, direct versus indirect sales, trial, rental, perpetual licenses, subscriptions, based upon any number of criteria. But that will be the content for our next webinar, and we encourage you to attend if those are topics of interest. Just to give you a practical idea of how this all comes together, we thought it might make sense to go through one case study of a customer of ours called Key Traffic Systems. They are based in the UK and primarily provide software for highway and traffic management, and not just in the UK, but around the world. And they've had a number of challenges. They've had a very successful business model for a number of years, but they primarily worked through a network license module and found that as they expanded, their needs in different markets had changed. And one of the examples would be in the U.S., specifically with the U.S. government, restricting access to USB ports. This was a challenge that their traditional hardware-based protection and lockdown no longer met that business need. Likewise, as they went into other markets, they really needed to have flexibility in terms of trialware and the ability to allow people to trial the software and then decide upon a business model as it went into production. Where we ended up with them is, after working with them for many years, we did exactly what Dale had discussed, right? We went down the process with them of really focusing on the protection, providing both the API and the envelope elements. And then really at the time of license issuance, they were able to decide if they really wanted to send a hardware key or if they wanted to send a software license. Likewise, they could do each of those for the networking versus standalone. And if any of you are interested, please let us know. We have a more detailed write-up on this case study. But I think as you read through the slide, you'll be able to see the salient points, and it's a good example of why we separate protection from licensing, in so much that they really are different sides of the same coin. So with that, I think now is the time where I will actually introduce a lot of the corporate information. I would like to just remind you that if you do have questions, now would be an excellent time to submit them. We will be covering those in just a couple of minutes, but in the meantime, I'll give you a brief overview of us. We are the global leader in anti-piracy and IP protection, enterprise licensing, entitlement management, and SaaS application management. We have approximately 25,000 customers in 100 countries, and we've been around for a little over 25 years now, and are in the $450 to $500 million in revenue range. So we have a very significant global footprint. We have offices on 5 continents, and we are multilingual, multicultural, and can provide support pretty much anywhere you need. Within that business, we have 2 or 3 main business areas, but the Sentinel rights management area, which is what all of us work on, is really composed of the following license and entitlement management solutions. Where for software licensing, we have our Sentinel HASP and Sentinel RMS products. Those are different hardware and software components, depending on what you're looking for. We also have an entitlement management system called Sentinel EMS, which is available in a web-based format and on-premise. And we are now in the process of launching our Sentinel Cloud services. So we have SaaS licensing and entitlement management services via the cloud. And this is all, of course, accompanied by professional services capability, both from the perspective of strategy consulting around your licensing, as well as implementation services and feature additions as necessary. So that, in a nutshell, that gives you an idea of the overall platform and portfolio. And with that, I think it probably makes sense to go ahead and open this up for questions, and I'll turn it back to Holger to moderate the session.
Thank you, Russ. All right. Please use the Ask a Question button on your screen to submit any questions, and I'll give it a couple more seconds for questions to come in. All right, here's the first one. Why would I use envelope protection versus API method? And Dale or Anthony, do you want to take that one?
Okay, I'll take it. For the envelope and the API, it really matters on how you wish to control the extra protection. So with the envelope, as we mentioned, it gives you a quick method of adding protection. You can modify without any source code. So that means taking the actual envelope itself, wrap it around the application that's already completed, and that means zero touch on source code. You can also add it into the debugging checks and reverse engineering measures, whereas the API itself, it really gives you more granular control so that you can actually add checks wherever you wish, and also allowing you to really do the modification of code to allow limited functionality or even crippled functionality, depending on whether you find a valid license or not.
All right, thank you. The next question we have is, I already have a protection solution in place, but I'm not happy with the licensing integration. Can your protection and licensing solution coexist with what I have already and later replace it? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take that. So yeah, as we had briefly mentioned, as any kind of solution, there's always a migration path that does exist. While we do have many migration paths, having the ability to run both, it really kind of diminishes that logistical issue that, how do I remove the key in the field and add it to the end customer. So you can decide to use either the envelope or the API and have, both keys in the field. So usually what customers do, they let the existing licensing be the enforcer. They decide if they use our envelope, they simply use the envelope for the additional protection. Again, the envelope will give you that debug and anti-reversing protection. So if that's the initial need that needs to be met, most customers simply wrap that and look for the default license, from our key. Most customers decide not to deploy a software license of ours, and then that key is just meant to do the encryption, decryption. Once it's decrypted securely, you would now rely on the existing legacy solution or the other solution, to do the license enforcement, whether it's a time license, perpetual, so forth. Again, with the API, similar thing. You would have the API to do a check for the key. You can even decide to have the API, to have both APIs inside the application. So the API can say, look for the Sentinel key. If Sentinel key is found, use Sentinel license. If Sentinel key is not found, look for the other provider's key. So you do have that option to have the ability to have, in a sense, both licensing solutions coexist. And again, that just lays the foundation of, so you can now move to that logistic issue of doing a swap of the key.
Excellent. Thanks, Dale. Quick reminder, if you have a question, please use your screen Ask a Question button to enter your question, and we'll try and answer that. The next question that came in is, where does protection stop and licensing start? And do I need a different solution for each? Dale, Anthony?
It's something where once if we go back to the slide before where we show the breakdown of protection and licensing itself, when we're talking about protection, usually it's only handled by the developers or the software engineers who would go and embed the license checks. And then it'll be up to the product management to come up and say, these are the features that I wish to really license for. So it really happens where they can both happen at the same time. They can both happen where maybe the product manager define the list of features first and then hand off to the developer saying, this is what you should license for. And at least for the other side of the actual licensing of it, we can always have it where the actual product definition, such as what kind of markets am I going to, what kind of products are going to be bundled in this particular version, that all gets defined later on? And what are, of course, what are the license types that are defined?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The next question here, are both of your models, file wrapping and API, supported in both Win7 and Mac environments supporting 64-bit?
Okay, yeah, so the easy answer to that is yes. Supporting with the Mac, so 10.4 up to 10.6 for the latest Mac operating systems, both 32 and 64-bit, as well as the Windows 7. That's fully supported as well. And the support just comes in with the device driver. So once you install, that device driver, it works. And again, it's a universal API. So there's no separate API for 32-bit and 64-bit. Our driver that we have to install, we do have those libraries available.
All right, very good. The next question here is there a way to make protection a part of the install without user impact and avoiding extra steps for the client?
Okay. For this, we actually embed the installer, meaning the runtime installer that's necessary for the software license to function correctly. And we can have that embedded as a standalone installer, or have it as a merge module or a DLL that you call as part of your own install.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Anthony. So we're running a little bit against our time window for today, and so I'd like to thank everybody for submitting your questions. If you have any further questions, please send us an email, and let me open up the slide with our email address. Please send us an email to srmquestions, in one word, at safenet-inc.com. You also see the email on the screen, and we will follow up with you after the webcast. So I would like to thank our audience today for taking the time to join us today, and I'd also like to thank our presenters for their insight into software protection. And please feel free to join our upcoming on-demand, or actually existing on-demand webcasts on BrightTalk, or join our upcoming webcasts on software monetization and software licensing. And with that, I look forward to seeing you at our upcoming webcasts. Again, thank you for your time.